Hello everyone, my name is Natsuki KAMIMURA. In this video, I'd like to talk about drug resistance bacteria. We've easily dead due to a cold, but thanks to antibiotics, it's ancient thing. Do you know penicillin? Penicillin is the first antibiotic. Antibiotics are chemicals produced by microorganisms that blocks the growth of bacteria and are effective against bacterial infections, such as pneumonia and suppuration. The discovery of antibiotics was groundbreaking. Since the introduction of antibiotics in this way, we have been saved by antibiotics. On the other hand, recently, drug-resistant bacteria that cause various infections diseases have emerged due to the abuse of antibiotics. The United Nations estimated that drug-resistant infections will be our number one cause of death by 2050 if we continue to use antibiotics without changing our behavior. Therefore, we must take action to survive. When doctors prescribe antibiotics, they tell us to take them all, right? This is because if the period is too short, some bacteria can be killed, but some survived. The remaining bacteria are resistant to antibiotics. Bacteria either mutate genes or receive genes that are resistant to medicine from other bacteria or viruses and turn into new bacteria. Bacteria that are resistant to these antibiotics are called drug-resistant bacteria. Now, drug-resistant bacteria has emerged. I would like to consider how to use antibiotics in the future. First, I'd like to introduce the opposite opinion to the use of antibiotics. Leon Markel, a bioprocess engineer, opposes the use of antibiotics in livestock and animals. About 80% of the world's antibiotics are used in animals. In fact, 60% of European pig salmonella are resistant to antibiotics. In other words, antibiotics are ineffective against half of salmonella. In the future, the number of diseases may increase as the number of antibiotic-resistant salmonella increases. Therefore, the use of livestock antibiotics should be reduced, Leon Markel said. There are three important things to avoid using antibiotics. The first is hygiene. It prevents diffusion. The second is nutrition improvement. Not only the material but also the shape is important. A high-fiber diet increases a beneficial intestinal flora and reduces the overgrowth of pathogens. Improving hygiene and nutrition alone cannot completely prevent illness. The last important thing is the microbiome. It creates an environment that blocks pathogens by acidifying food and water in favor of beneficial bacteria. There are about 8 times as many bacteria in the intestine as the cells in the body. Without antibiotics, the approach is from the host, nutrition, and microbiome. The absence of antibiotics is beneficial not only to humans but also to animals. Their lives will also improve. He argued that efforts are needed to avoid a future in which infection diseases are the leading cause of death. Is it really beneficial not to use antibiotics? There are creatures that have the potential to help overcome the deadly health threat of drug-resistant bacteria. It is a Komodo dragon. It inhabits Indonesia and is the largest and heaviest lizard in the world. Despite eating low khaki sheets, cotton dragons have a very low incidence of bacterial infection and can survive injuries such as loss of limbs. Humans depend on adaptive immunity. It identifies, eliminates, and remembers pathogens that our bodies have been exposed to in the past and target and fight them with antibodies. On the other hand, reptiles tend to rely on innate immunity to combat infection. Unnatural immunity protects the body from previous unexposed pathogens and works with antimicrobial peptides. In search of promising new antibiotics, Bishop and Barhoek, professor at George Mason University in Virginia, are studying the Komodo dragons AMPs. As part of the defense against infection, almost any organism can produce AMPs. Not only does AMP have antibiological activity, but it also plays various roles, such as actually stimulating the host immune system to act and promoting healing. Komodo dragons are highly dependent on innate immunity, so they are like a living database of AMPs that have been ornate over millions of years of evolution. Perhaps we can benefit if we can understand their continued success in this evolutionary arms race. AMPs exhibiting antibacterial activity that may be produced by humans have been identified. Some of these are more active against drug-resistant strains than non-resistant strains. Studies on the use of AMPs in the innate immunity of reptiles reveal a new understanding of the mammalian innate immune system. This is helpful for the development of potential treatments. I introduced the pros and cons. In fact, there is already a move to ban the use of antibiotics, and the EU completely banned the use of antibiotics in 2006. This seemed to solve the problem. However, when the reduction problem began, livestock became ill one after another. Eventually, antibiotics were needed for treatment. That is, the total amount of antibiotics used increased rather than decreased. On the other hand, there are high expectations for future research on antibiotics. When used correctly, it reduces the chance of developing resistant strains. In order not to increase the amount of drug-resistant bacteria, it is important not to receive them when not needed, to take all the prescribed amount, and not to give it to others. It is important for each person to have the correct understanding and care. We should not use antibiotics. That's not possible. Can you imagine a life without antibiotics? There are too many disadvantages to living a life without antibiotics. Antibiotics are a great discovery of our predecessors. It's worth not to use this. In fact, groundbreaking research is underway. The outbreak of drug-resistant bacteria will never end, but this is because we use it wrong way. It can be improved by consciously using antibiotics in the correct way. One day, medicines containing breakthrough compounds will actually be available in our lives. This requires a great deal of time, investment, and research. Clear studies are the hopes of us and future generations.